Okay, so we've got a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Richard here. Richard, you have built an incredible company that is transforming the way people do meetings. Instead of sitting down in a meeting and writing all these notes and then having to pay attention as it's happening, you have an AI note-taking um, company that essentially gathers all this data, makes it into summaries. It doesn't just write everything; it also summarizes it and makes it smart for you, actionable, and it's really been a very helpful tool. So I'm excited to have you here and talk about your story and what you're building.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
So, Richard, how did this idea happen? What made you want to solve the note taking problem?
I mean, I don't think anyone's really enjoyed taking notes, right? It's kind of why it's such a great business to build. But about 5 years ago, I was just on a lot of Zoom calls myself and, was just kind of remarking about how, when you're back to back Zoom calls, like a lot of us were during COVID, like it's just, I'm one thing to the next. I'm trying to hurriedly take notes as I'm talking to folks. I'm like cleaning up those notes after the call. And then I'm looking at those notes 2 weeks later, and I'm like, I don't remember which meeting this was. Or more importantly, it's like I was trying to share. I wrote these notes to share what I'm learning when talking to customers with my team, and I show them 3 bullet points from my notes, and everyone kind of shrugs, right? So like, so much is like it's a stressful process, it's a lossy process, and just so much stuff gets kind of lost in translation, when you try to pass it along. I also previously, my background's engineering and product design, but for a period of my last startup, I ran kind of our sales team and our CS team. And so I've been on the other side where I've been trying to manage a team of people that are talking to customers. And the only insight I had into what was happening in those conversations were their notes. And some people wrote too for post notes. Most people wrote not enough. But no matter what the note quality was, I always found myself wanting more. And I always found myself saying, gosh, I wish I could just hear how that customer expressed that objection. Or, what do they actually sound like when they said, yeah, we're going to buy your product sort of thing, right? I was infamous for just saying like, yeah, but what do they actually say, right? To all of my reps. And so I feel like it was one of those aha moments where I saw this problem from both sides, both from the side of the person on the meeting who's stressed out trying to talk and be a scribe at the same time, and as someone in like a manager executive position doesn't have time to listen to a bunch of recordings, doesn't have time to sit in a bunch of meetings, but is expected to become omnipotent about what's happening in their team, in their organization. And so I kind of looked at that and said, gosh, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? It's 2020. And we kind of started the company with 2 theses. We thought transcription cost was going to come down a lot. And we thought Gen AI was going to get really good. And in 2020, that was a pretty contrarian take. I remember a lot of investors freaking out on me when I put AI in our product name in 2020, because it's hard to remember now, but there was a whole raft of AI companies in the late 20 teens, and their products were pretty bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we, I think through a lot of my network of being in Silicon Valley, I had a lot of conviction that, no, I know there's a lot of smart people working on this, a lot of money going in the space. It's going to get better. Let's go build this company assuming that Gen AI is actually going to work and that, transcription costs are going to come down. And we can be the first people to give a product like this away for free so that everyone in a company can, get the benefit of having an AI sidekick on the call, not just like a sales team.
So, how did you actually build this technology, Richard? Like, what does this even look like? Because it doesn't seem like there's the same type of easy integration into like a Google Meet or a Zoom as there is a building a typical web plugin or an app for the App Store.
I mean, it's actually interesting. It's what I call an iceberg product, where it looks really simple on the surface, but under the surface, like there's a lot of complexity, right? It's a real time system, right? As you mentioned, it has to join your meetings. There's no API for those meetings, or rather, there was, and a lot of our competitors were using it. For example, Zoom had an API where you could get the recording of a meeting, but it'd take half an hour to an hour to get that recording. And one of the things we learned early on is like this thing obviously needs to be reliable, right? You're gonna depend on it to take your notes, and so it can't miss a meeting, it can't be late for a meeting, right? But also needs to be really fast. Notes, for all their flaws, one of the things notes have is immediacy. You get off the meeting, your notes are there, right? And so we said it's not acceptable for our solution to take half an hour. So we got it down. I pushed our engineering team in the beginning to they're like, how fast does it need to be? I was like, I don't know, just keep making it faster and I'll tell you when it's fast enough. We got it down to about, I think, 25 seconds. And I was like, okay, it takes you about 30 seconds to get off the meeting. So 25 seconds feels kind of like instantaneous, right? So the big challenges of products are, you got to make it work on top of these platforms. There's no documented API. So you're kind of just like, it's a very Rube Goldberg machine to capture in the first place. You got a lot of data, right? You're capturing audio and video, large volumes of data. Everyone does meetings at the same time, right? So, if you think about a system, it's not like running a website where it's like we just put up a bunch of servers and traffic load is relatively consistent across the day. It's write heavy. It spikes during the middle of the day. It spikes every half hour during the work day. It's a really sticky problem. I'm very fortunate that I'd done a previous startup, and I had through that I knew a bunch of great engineers, and so I feel like I started this company kind of on second base because I started with like 4 of the best engineers I've worked with before. Um, my background is engineering, but no one's let me write code in like 15 years. So I was really grateful that I got some really amazing engineers to start this off because it's a very, very technical product on the back end.
So building this, how long did it take to get it done? When did you feel comfortable launching, Richard? Was the MVP even somewhat usable, or was it really quite difficult to figure this out, what you just talked about building?
I mean, it took us about a year till we actually launched something. And in that year, I think within like the first 2 months, I had something that I could use myself. But oh boy, did it have sharp edges, right? Like, as I mentioned, there's a lot of ways a Zoom call can go wrong, sort of thing. You don't think about it, but it's like, there's all sorts of complexity to it. And so, I think we constantly went through this iteration where I would work my network to get 20, 30 people to sign up every week. I'd handhold them through what was a very clunky onboarding process. They'd get up and running. They'd use it. They might be wowed. Sorry. They might be wowed. And then, they'll hit some bug. And, again, it's a product where if it breaks on you once, you're going to go back to pen and paper. So I think we went through, if I remember, we went through like 800 users where we just burned out, I put, 30 to 50 of them into a sign up cohort, and all of them, churned out within a month, until we got to a point where I think it was about 9 months in where it's like, I got a stable cohort of about, 50 users where about 35 of them kept using it over and over. And I was like, okay, it's really small numbers, but like, this is a really good sign. Right. And I've been using it myself the whole time. And so, obviously I have a higher tolerance for these bugs and stuff like that, but I saw how it changed how I worked. It was like one of the most transformative things, right? Like really changed my my level of stress during the day to have this thing, knowing it was backing me up the entire time. So I had a lot of conviction from my own usage. And then when I saw that first cohort that like really survived, it was really good. And so it took us about a year to build the product to the point where it was like kind of good enough to put out into the world.
And when you launched it, was this something that you felt you needed substantial marketing behind? I mean, you mentioned the kind of people you're trying to get on just through your network, but I mean, you can do a lot with a network effect, but what was the plan of just getting this thing out there? Was there a viral demo opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we were always excited about with this product is that it had kind of inbuilt kind of virality or natural word of mouth motion, right? You're bringing this thing to a meeting, it's visible in the meeting, you kind of explain why it's there. And so you kind of naturally end up giving kind of a sales pitch for it, right? And it's the other reason why I was so adamant we have to make this thing free, right? Because if you're like, oh, I use this tool, it's different than like, I've got this tool, it does this job for me, and it's free. It kind of turns into, I want to tell you about the secret too, right? Free products have a way of like recommendations for free products feel like free gifts, right? In a way that recommendations for paid products don't. And so we always had that in the back of our head. If we get it into enough meetings, it will naturally kind of spread. Where we got kind of fortunate is that I think it was like 4 weeks after we launched, Zoom announced that they were building this whole new marketplace for apps. So you can have apps directly in your Zoom client. And that was obviously a watershed moment for us. It was a really scary moment because we've only been doing the company for 4 weeks. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have to be in this program. We are not in this program. There's 30 companies in this program. They're all, really big, well-known companies. And I hustled my butt off to try to get this program. I like raised money from anyone who had any relationship to Zoom, tried to get any inroads I could. And eventually got very fortunate that someone's like, hey, the person that runs this program is named this. Here's their email. And I just cold emailed the guy. And was like, hey, I think our startup would be a great fit for your marketplace. And it's kind of insane when I think about it because we had one user at that point, one DAU, and that was me. And I'm pitching Zoom, which is this point, which is the hottest company in the world. I was like, I've done a startup before. We're just got into Y Combinator. Like, here's what we're doing. And they were awesome. And they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you on the platform. So we got really fortunate that we launched on this, like at the same time, Zoom launched this marketplace into, 300 million people during the pandemic. It was a pretty amazing kind of feat.
How did you handle that, Richard? Like from a technical standpoint, resource standpoint, it didn't seem like you had the team to really handle what could be happening.
I mean, one of the hardest things to do in startups is like load testing, like to figure out ahead of time what's going to break, right? And so we were both excited. My engineering team was terrified, right? Because they're like staring down the barrel of a gun kind of thing. It's like we got I told you, before launch, we had like 30 active users, right? And now we're going to launch into the Zoom Marketplace. It's a funny story about that. We launched on the Zoom Marketplace. We got 100,000 signups in the first month, and which is a mind-blowing number. However, I'll tell you, is also probably the scariest point of this entire journey, because at the end of that month, we only had 100 DAU. 100,000 people. We only went from 30 people pre-launch to 100 people post-launch. And this caused obviously a crisis of conviction on my side, right? I was like, what did we do wrong? I thought we had a great product. I use it. I love it. And it took us a couple of weeks to figure out that, oh my gosh, this is during the pandemic. There were a lot of casual users, right? There were people that were doing happy hours on Zoom, and they're, random things they've never done before on Zoom. So a lot of casual users. And we went back and looked, because we're targeting business users. 99.9% of people that signed up for Fathom had 0 meetings on their calendar in the upcoming week or the past week, right? Zoom meetings. And so what you realize is that we found out later that Zoom opened up this marketplace first and foremost to their free users, which makes sense. They're going to open up to the lowest risk users first. And so they gave us this flood of their lowest engaged users. So we got tons of signups and very little engagement. And at the time, I was kind of, crestfallen about that. I was like, oh, that was our big launch. What the heck happened? I'm a big believer, everything kind of happens for a reason. And that reason was, if we had gotten 100,000 real users, real active, there's no way I'd be talking to you today. We would absolutely have fallen, there's no way we could have scaled up that quickly. Yeah. And what the 100,000 users did do is it gave us a really good stream of users to test our onboarding process, which at launch I thought was pretty good, but actually was only only about 25 to 30% of people got through the onboarding process, because you have to install a desktop app and all sorts of stuff. And so it kind of was great. I had all these, usually as a startup, it's hard to get 10 users a day. And so it's really hard to tell if your onboarding process is any good, because you don't have enough volume. I had enough people coming through that sign-up process. They weren't very good users. They were never going to use the product, but they would go through the sign-up process. And I could get statistical significance on any change I made to that sign-up process within 24 hours. And so I sat with one engineer, and we went for 3 months and just every day improved that sign-up process. And so at the end of that period, we had a 70% conversion rate on onboarding, not 30. And I think that really set us up for success, because as time went on, those Zoom users got a lot smaller, but a lot more qualified, right? And so I think about it was kind of a happy accident, if you will. But no, if we had 100,000 users on day one, there's no way. As good as my engineering team is, there's no way we could have survived that.
So you did eventually a Series A that you had 1,000 something users invest in. How did that kind of happen, and why did you want the users to just be a part of it, part of the company on a different basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on we try to do a lot. We always knew we have one marketing channel, and that is our users, right? If they love us, they'll tell their friends about us. They'll, when the Fathom bot comes to the meeting, they'll sing our praises. And so from the early days, we cared a lot about NPS. We cared a lot about not just people liking the product, people loving the product, and people loving their experience with Fathom. We actually I hired some of my old sales folks early on and said, I don't want you to sell anything. I just want you to be a really great CSM for 2 years until we had nothing to sell for the first 2.5 years of the company. We were giving it away for free. And we hired a support team really early on. I said, this is a free product, but I want it to feel like you're spending 5 figures for the product when you contact the support desk. And so from the early days, I was just always obsessed with I want when you interact with this company, no matter if you have a problem or you're something happy, you just feel great about it. Right. I want you to feel like you're part of the team. And so we actually gave away, I think it was a couple of early users, we actually gave them equity in the company. And this is something I'm not a big crypto guy, but one thing I've seen crypto projects do is they did this where they gave a lot of early adopters of their tools kind of a stake in that token or whatnot. And I always thought that was really cool, right? Usually that stuff is reserved just for your early investors, and it's kind of the privileged few. But the folks your early adopters that seek you and find you out and telling their friends about you, I just feel like they're such an important community. And so from early days, we were giving equity away for free. And then, we did actually, before our Series A, we did a crowd fund. And every time we did a round of funding, we were doing kind of a crowd fund on the back of it at the same exact terms as our investors did. Because I kind of fundamentally also believe that I don't think, investing in startups should be something that's the privileged access of folks in, Bay Area and New York sort of thing, right? And I think we did one, and we kind of just did it. It's so a few people were asking to invest, and it wildly exceeded our expectations. And so we did our Series A And even like, I think the first time we did it, it took us like 6 months to raise like $1 million from our users. We just kept leaving it open because people kept saying, I still want to invest. And so we did the Series A. We did the same thing where I said,
It's
before we
fascinating.
raised our Series A, I told our VC, like, we're going to allocate 10% of our round to our users. They were a little apprehensive. They're like, we go for it. And yeah, people loved it. They were super excited. I think we closed out the round in like 3 weeks.
Wow.
So it was really fun. And it's really cool to see that kind of engagement from the community.
Mhm. In terms of like statistics of like people taking meetings better and being more attention oriented in them, like how much of a difference does Fathom really make, Richard, for people?
I mean, I'd say the biggest benefit of a product like this is kind of intangible, right? And this we see in our NPS surveys, right? People just go, I feel so much, I feel more at ease, right? I'm not on edge worrying I'm going to miss something. We all zone out during types of meetings, right? Even if you're a salesperson on a sales call, right? And you're a professional, like it's hard to keep attention, especially when you're going back to back all day. So I'd say like the number one impact of this product to the people on the meeting is somewhat intangible. But I will say we also do regular surveys, and Fathom does save you a lot of time after the meeting, right? Because we're writing the notes, we're filling them in your CRM, we're writing the action items, we're putting them in your Asana. You can draft your follow-up email, you name it, right? You got a question about the meeting, we've got an AI. You can just kind of like chat GPT, like, hey, what do we talk about with this, right? So your post-meeting kind of time, like work, goes down dramatically. And I think the last survey we did, we saw that like people kind of claim to be saving like 15, 20 minutes a meeting. So that adds up pretty quickly, right? And I think that's kind of why we don't love meetings. Taking stressful, and every meeting has like, I spend half an hour in this meeting and I spend 10 minutes after the meeting cleaning up my notes, right? So every meeting is more than just the time I'm spending in it. But I'd also say the other big thing we're really excited about now is not just taking notes, but how do we help people that weren't on meetings? So going back to, remember I said, I ran a sales team before. I always had questions what was happening. Now we have the same thing for people not on the meeting. I can go to like a deal, or I can just go to my company repository and I can ask questions like, what are the top competitors we're running into in the last 90 days? Which ones are we being compared favorably to? Or I can jump into a deal and be like, did we actually have a critical event here? And immediately it gives me an answer, and it will send me also directly to that point in the meeting. 3 meetings ago, 10 minutes in, here's where they discussed their critical event. And it's just, I think, a time saver all around, not only for the folks who are on the meeting, but also for folks in management.
So how do you see the evolution of Fathom? Like you've got this tool, it's focused on note taking. Is it more about what you can do with the notes when they're taken and translated over? Or is there ways to even improve the ability to get the notes? I mean, it seems like it's really good. Like you've got that down. Like I don't know what else needs to be improved there. It's just more of like what you do with the notes after.
Yeah, I mean, I think we always talk about kind of 3 phases to Fathom. One is write really good notes for you. But notes, to me, I always tell our team, this is like Netflix sending DVDs, right? Everyone thinks they want notes, and so we're really good at generating notes. But what you really want is memory and recall and insight, right? We take notes for those reasons. And then, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. You have all these meetings, especially in sales. You have hours of meetings. You take some notes, you put them in your CRM to what? Understand what's happening to the customer, but you've lost 99% of the content in the interim, right? So I think there's 2 things we really get excited about for the future. One is, I mentioned getting off the meeting and the notes are already done for you. What if the notes weren't just done? What if the action items were done too, right? So imagine a world where you get off the meeting and half your action items are already done, right? It's drafted the statement of work, the spec is halfway written, like I get really excited about that, right? Because that's always stresses me out when I get off the meeting. It's like, oh, now I got to do all these things. What if the AI already is kind of working on it? But the thing that gets me really excited is, what if we get to a world where there's an AI companion that you have that's sitting in every meeting in your org that you have access to. And you don't have to attend all these meetings anymore. But it knows what topics you care about. It knows what projects you're working on. And the information finds you, right? So many of us sit through so many different meetings to kind of, get the context we need to do our job. What if we didn't have to, and let's be honest, how many times were we 100% engaged in those meetings, right? Like, someone missed something once in a recurring meeting. Now they're in that recurring meeting all the time, whether they need to be or not. And so I look at the world where I think we're not very far from a place where every sales call, every customer success call, every internal meeting is in a platform like Fathom. The AI can, has the time to listen to every recording. It also knows everything you care about, and it can start pushing you content and being like, hey, Rich, welcome back. It's Monday morning. Here's your 10-minute podcast recapping all the things you might have missed from last week. Like the amount of kind of like the amount of improvement we can make and how we kind of share information in the org, I think is going to be tremendous. Not to mention, like, if I have a question about anything that's happening in the org, think about all the documentation we always have to create out of meetings, right? We create knowledge bases, knowledge management tools. We did this experiment the other day. We asked Fathom, which is kind of like our chat GPT, like, hey, what's the history of like transcription engines at Fathom? And it went back over 4 years of engineering meetings, and it wrote a
Wow.
6-page article outlining, here's every decision you've made, here's the impact it had, da da da. And think about that, like, okay, now we don't have to maintain all of these, Notion pages, CRMs. We just have conversations, and that becomes that alone is enough for us to now have this like second brain that can remember stuff for us. I think it's gonna be super cool.
Richard, just the last question I have. What are the upcoming goals like that you're focused on right now from a product development standpoint, new features? Like what do you want to accomplish that you haven't done yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think two big things we're working on right now. One is more of these tools that allow you to build kind of agents that do we just roll out an agent where if you're running a sales team, it can kind of if you have like a methodology, it can keep the scorecard. Right? Are people following the scorecard? We just built out this Ask Fathom piece. We've always had it for individual meetings, but now it can sit on top of your entire company's repository of meetings and do things like I just mentioned with that, writing up whole knowledge-based articles or answering questions about trends. We're also doing some things for folks on the meetings. I think all of us that are using tools like Fathom see more and more of these bots pop up in meetings. We're about to roll out a version where you can capture the meeting without having a bot in the meeting. Maybe you don't even want the recording. Maybe you just want the audio, or maybe you just want the transcript. We see this a lot in internal meetings. We're also rolling out ability to capture in-person meetings. The technology for speaker diarization, which is like who said what, it's gotten really good. And so we can now just drop an iPhone app, on a desk. You click a button, and it knows what you sound like. It knows what your colleagues sound like, and it can do as good of a job in person as it does on a Zoom call. So I think there's kind of two dimensions. One is just like continuing to deepening the amount of stuff you can do with this data as you get more meetings into Fathom. And the other one is just like building out a bunch of features so it's so much easier to take Fathom into every conversation you're having. Slack huddles, in-person meetings, Zooms, you name it.
Richard, I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think you've created a really amazing tool that's transformed the way meetings are done. And there's a lot more that people are able to be productive in because of this tool that you've made. And I mean, every meeting I'm in pretty much has a Fathom, Fathom AI joining in, to go and take notes. So, I mean, it's incredible the reach and the scale of what you build. And I'm just excited to see the next phase of it.